Hello, David.
Hey, good morning.
Morning. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started so we don't run out of time. We always end up running out of time as we head towards the 2 o'clock hour. People have to take off for class and things like that. So welcome to this panel with CASAR. CASAR is the Prince Al-Walid Center for American Studies and Research. It was established here at AUC in 2003 by Prince Al-Walid of the Saudi royal family, who put together this center here in Cairo. We are one of 6 original centers. The others were established at AUB in Beirut, at Cambridge University in the UK, and Edinburgh University in the UK, and at Harvard and Georgetown in the United States. So, and actually since then, there have been a few other institutions added to our network. One is NYU Abu Dhabi, among others. And then because we're developing a focus on cultural heritage, there's been a number of museums kind of added to this network. So anyway, the center was established here in 2003 to basically foster cultural understanding between the Middle East and the West. So that's why you have institutions that are situated in the West that are focused on Islamic studies and Middle East studies. And then you have these 2 institutions here in the Middle East, in Cairo and Beirut, that are focused on American studies. So again, trying to foster that cultural dialogue between the 2. So our guest panel today, we have a group of experts here that I'm really excited about. So by the way, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Mark Deets, and I'm an assistant professor in the history department, and I'm also the director currently of CASAR. And I am also assisted by Yasmin El-Ghazali, who helps with a lot of these events. And it's also great to have Alail Hadidi, our adjunct professor, here in the audience today. Let me go ahead and introduce our guest experts for today. I'll start with David Dumke, who is joining us via Zoom. David Dumke serves as the executive director of the University of Central Florida Global Perspectives and International Initiatives. He also co-hosts the WUCF TV Global Perspectives show. Dumke was founding director of UCF's Prince Mohammed bin Fahd Program for Strategic Research and Studies, as well as the Office of Middle East and South Asia Initiatives. He also teaches Middle East politics, diplomacy, and U.S. foreign policy, about which he has written extensively. In 2019, he co-authored and edited Aspiring Powers, Regional Rivals, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the New Middle East. Dumke also, after spending the early part of his career working in the U.S. Congress, he accumulated a diverse set of professional experiences, generally focusing on the international government, business, policy-making nexus. In the government affairs public relations realm, David has represented clients in numerous fields, including foreign affairs, international business, defense policy, energy, and natural resources. He served in Congress as an aide to House Energy and Commerce Committee Chairman John Dingell, Democrat from Michigan, Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan, and Representative Fred Upton, a Republican from Michigan, as well as working on a variety of state and federal election campaigns. He received his BA from Indiana and a master's degree from Georgetown. And hopefully we're going to be joined eventually by Manar El-Shorbagi, who is an associate professor of political science. She's the former academic director of the Prince Al Walid Center for American Studies and Research at AUC. In other words, she was in my job before. Her scholarly publications appear in both Arabic and English, the latest of which appeared in the May 2024 issue of the Arab Studies Quarterly under the title Triangular Dynamics, a U.S. Response to China's Assertiveness in the Middle East. She writes a weekly op-ed in the Egyptian newspaper Al-Masri Al-Yum and a monthly op-ed in the Dubai-based Al-Bayan newspaper. Last but not least, sitting to my left is Ambassador Karim Haggag. He is a career Egyptian diplomat with over 25 years of service in Egypt's diplomatic corps and is currently serving as a professor of practice at the School of GAP at the American University in Cairo. Throughout his career, he has served in numerous capacities focusing on U.S.-Egyptian relations, Middle East regional security, arms control and non-proliferation, and Arab-Israeli diplomacy. His assignments have included serving as director of the Egyptian Press and Information Office in Washington, D.C., the Office of the Presidency in Cairo, responsible for U.S.-Egyptian relations and economic policy coordination, and the political section of Egypt's embassy in Washington, where he was responsible for politico-military affairs and the Middle East peace process. In addition to his diplomatic assignments, Haggag was also a visiting professor with the Near East and South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He's currently a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Initiative at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He's also a graduate of AUC and has earned a master's degree in war studies from King's College London. And he's currently the director of the Middle East Studies Center at AUC. So welcome, Manar. By the way, I introduced you shortly before you walked into the room, so welcome. And with that said, as an introduction, I'd like to go ahead and turn the floor over to David Dumke, coming to us from Florida, for some opening remarks, especially kind of based on his experience working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., bringing us some of the political perspective on this question of the election results and what it means in D.C. vis-a-vis relations with the Middle East. David Dumke, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. It's always great to join you, even bright and early here. So thanks for having me today. First, I want to start by talking about the result itself. Obviously, this is a win for Donald Trump and the Republicans who captured control of Congress as well as the White House. The U.S. Supreme Court is definitely favoring more conservative Republican policies. Trump appointed several of the justices himself during the first term. So on the surface, it appears this is going to be definitely a new era, new Republican era, where there's potentially not going to be a lot of pushback. However, I would note, for all the talk about a landslide, which Trump himself has mentioned leads to a mandate of sorts, it was a very narrow victory. We're talking about less than 2% of the vote. We're talking about a U.S. House of Representatives, which actually Republicans lost 2 seats and has perhaps the thinnest majority we've seen in definitely a half century. What I'm saying is it's going to be very hard to govern. This is still a very divided country. So talks of mandates and being able to ramrod essentially an agenda through without opposition, I think, is a little overstated. This is particularly true when you look at some of the priority issues that President-elect Trump has highlighted, one of which is government reform. And this has become talked about with much fanfare, of course, because Elon Musk is one of the people supposedly doing this government review. Any administration who attempts to reform the federal government almost always runs into peril. The U.S. government is a massive entity. You can liken it to an ocean liner. It does not turn very quickly. And every time you try to tweak it, as former presidents have discovered, whether it's Ronald Reagan or Jimmy Carter, Al Gore led Bill Clinton's efforts to reform government, you run into a hornet's nest of special interests. Every issue ranging from agriculture, labor, education, all has interest groups behind it. So it's not going to be as easy as President Trump is sounding to have profound changes on the government structure. This also is true of foreign policy, which is more pertinent to our conversation. Um, we all know who President Trump is. He had a really rocky first term. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who ran against him and lost in 2016, said Trump is going to be the chaos president. And that's pretty accurate as that applies to foreign policy. We're going to see several changes that start from the top. One is there is President Trump does not have the same faith in the alliance system that the United States has very, very much advocated and relied on since World War II. In fact, one of the biggest changes underway is going to be really kind of the global rules of the road. The world order as it stands today was really created by the United States after World War II, with a constant emphasis on opening markets through trade, freer trade, if not free trade, and collective security, as well as having multilateral institutions such as the UN serve important diplomatic functions. You're going to see less reliance on this. What comes in fact, one can say a second Trump presidency kind of dooms America's commitment to supporting the system it itself created. So that's something to watch going forward because we don't know what is going to replace it. What kind of a multipolar system is going to come in its place? You're going to see a weakening of U.S. alliances. You're also going to see, obviously, more protectionist instincts on trade. And also you're going to see a weakening of multilateral institutions such as the UN, which one can say has really become almost akin to the 1930s League of Nations at this point. The biggest problem and challenge for President Trump, or really the presidents that will follow him, is what is the U.S. strategy going to be? The U.S. has really been adrift since the end of the Cold War. It was a much easier world to divide into black and white, communist and non-communist. We went from the Cold War era to the global war on terrorism, which really was kind of a whack-a-mole type system. You see a problem here, you go attack it. Some call it the world policeman, but really it's going to put out fires and trouble spots, but without any really discernible and consistent determination as to when the U.S. is going to get involved and where. President John Quincy Adams warned, of course, the U.S. should not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, otherwise you become the dictatress of the world. Unfortunately, this logic has largely proved correct. The U.S. has gone from one country to another, trying to put out fires, but without any consistent ideology, which makes it very hard to predict American behavior. I'm going to throw that out. Now, the Trump foreign policy is not necessarily an isolationist one. That's really impossible at this point, but it's definitely a more impulsive foreign policy and much more transactional. What does this mean? U.S. is going to review its foreign assistance policy. Right now, each year, the United States spends $70 billion in foreign aid. That equals about 1% of the federal government. That, believe it or not, is at an all-time high for the United States. Traditionally, it's about half that. And I think if the Trump administration gets its way, you're going to see significant cuts in foreign aid. Now, there are those who say, well, foreign aid is an important tool for the United States, which is true enough. But I think the logic that's coming from the Trump people, as well as you're going to see in Congress, is what has the foreign aid really gotten the United States? What national interest is it serving? As I mentioned, trade is going to be reviewed. Now, keep in mind, U.S. foreign trade amounts to about 27% of all GDP, and that's according to the Business Roundtable, which is a group of very big businesses in the United States, CEOs of those businesses. That equates to 39 million jobs that rely on foreign trade. And with Canada and Mexico alone, about 12.5 million jobs. What I'm saying is this is a huge part of the US economy. So when you say we're going to impose tariffs of 25% on Mexico and Canada right off the start, which are the top two trading partners, it's going to have profound consequences both in the economic interactions between the countries as well as potential job losses. Now, President Trump is not, no president anywhere in the world is immune to pressure when people lose their jobs. In fact, he can credit his victory to economic anxieties among people. So that's important to keep in mind. You're going to start doing massive change to the US economy. It's going to have political ramifications inside the United States. Another area that may get reviewed, we'll see, is the role of the US military. Currently, the United States has 128 military bases outside the United States. The U.S. Military budget is about $830 billion a year. That's the single biggest item in the budget, other than servicing debt, by the way. So this is going to, obviously, when you have a target that big and you're reviewing budget to try to cut things, that is going to get some consideration, especially because President Trump's relations with the military officer corps itself are strained after the first term, and he has made direct threats to them throughout the campaign. So we'll see how that plays out. What I'm saying is he may not be as tied to protecting some of these interests. Obviously, we're going to see a review of relations with Russia, but more specifically with China. That is going to take a lot of focus of the U.S. This strategic competition is what they're calling it. Trump's instincts are more protectionist with China. So you're going to see a lot more rhetoric and actions directed towards isolating China, ratcheting up a trade war with China, but also threatening allies who do business with China, particularly in the energy sphere. In the region, you're going to see a lot of U.S. saying essentially, pick teams, pick China or us. You can't pick both. We'll see how that plays out in reality. There's several other issues we can go over, but I want to mention briefly the Middle East, which I know my colleagues in the panel here are going to be talking about. But as we talk about foreign aid and lack of U.S. strategy, we really have to look at this region in particular. This is really a region the U.S. has created, and it's not in good shape. It is a region, as you know, filled with failed and failing states. It's also the region that gets the most U.S. foreign assistance and has for some time. Since 1946, the region has received $372.6 billion. That's more than any other region, more than any other two regions combined. Of that, Israel alone has received $158 billion, and that's before the October 7th, 2023 attacks. In the last year, Israel's received $17.9 billion in 1 year alone. Now, if you're putting that kind of money in there and you're going to do a business assessment of the Middle East, is this what you're paying for? Considering the three largest recipients of U.S. foreign aid in the world on an average year. I say average because things like Ukraine and Afghanistan can create some anomalies for a period of time. But the top three recipients are Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. So this is very much a region the U.S. has heavily invested in. And obviously, investing in this status quo is not sustainable for the region or the United States. I'm going to leave it with that. I think we need some time for questions and to let my colleagues talk. Thank you for indulging me. This is first thing in the morning here. I've not had my coffee, so if I didn't make complete sense, forgive
We
me.
appreciate you waking up so early for us, David, the discussion. So, yeah, get a cup of coffee, and we'll have some questions here for you soon.
Great.
I'd like to turn it over now to Manar El-Shorbagi to well, talk about what you want, but we've asked her to talk about more of the international perspective, especially vis-a-vis Russia and China. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for coming. I don't think that I will add much to what David has actually mentioned. I will quickly mention or talk about 4 points, and then because I want to really hear from you more. But before I say these few points, I would say that any analysis of the US today has to have, with the Trump administration, has to have several caveats. The first of them, and I agree totally with David, this was not a landslide, and it's not a mandate. And if we look at the numbers, it will give us a very different story. The turnout for this election was almost the same, 158 million, I think. But it seems to me it was a Harris defeat more than a Trump win, because the numbers, if we look at the numbers of Trump in 2020, it's almost 74 million votes. This year, it's 75.6, which means 1.6 million more. Now, for Biden, it was 81 million votes in 2020, and Harris got 72.4 million, which is a difference of 8.6 million than what Trump got. The reason why I mention this is also because Democrats did, even in Harris, where Harris lost in several states, Democrats did better for Congress or for state elections. This would mean for me is that it's not just that it's not a mandate, it's not a landslide, but also it means that whatever analysis we're going to say is actually about only the first 2 years of the Trump administration. And it's not just because of the congressional election, which is in 2026, but also once the president loses popularity, not just the Democrats in Congress, but also members of his own party are going to challenge him even much more or bolder challenge than before. The second caveat, in my view, is that Trump is very hard to predict, as we know already from his first administration. Also, the usual caveat, which we actually see right now, is that the president always gets new unexpected events in the world and he has to react to. The other point is that Trump was not really an isolationist, as David said in the first and I would like to say this because this is something that is said about him all the time. And no isolationist would actually raise the defense budget as much as he did. No isolationist would actually use irregular warfare, like, you know, the assassination of Soleimani, which was ordered by Trump, and an airstrike against Syria that actually was almost going to, reach a standoff between Russia and the United States, and also the sanctions on Iran. All of these are indicators that Trump is not really an isolation, but we can say, as David said, it's more a protectionist when it comes to trade. Now, all Trump's nominees, and that will be my third point, all of Trump's nominees are actually chosen according to only one criteria, which is loyalty. But when it comes to the national security and foreign policy team, it's probably the one thing that is common with the previous administration, which is the Trump pattern of choosing a team of rivals that would really be fighting over and competing over his loyalty, over his, loyalty and stuff like that. But this team of rivals is actually, in my view, have three groups. The first one is the one that really would prefer to reduce U.S. commitments across the world. And it's interesting to me that though this camp's nominees are the ones for the UN, representative to the UN, Tulsi Gabbard, and the Pentagon. And both of them are actually converts. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat turned MAGA Republican, and the Pete Hegseth, I think I'm pronouncing it right, was actually a neoconservative before he now changed his mind. The other group is really the neoconservatives, which means, actually this was the name that we used to talk about when we talked about the W. Bush team. They are for America's unchallenged role in the world, US domination, and the US empire, including using the US or heavily depending on US military force, even if unilaterally, it doesn't matter. Now, out of this second group, there is a little different, smaller group, which doesn't really necessarily differ with this group on the US hegemony or the US domination and all of that. It only wants to refocus that into focusing on China, which is seen as the most consequential, that's what they call it, the most consequential geostrategic challenge. In my view, China is only a threat if the US is thinking about world domination. Otherwise, it's not, in my view, it's not a challenge. The last group is really what Obama was doing. It's basically the pivot to Asia, which doesn't mean, by the way, retreating from the Middle East in any way, but Biden has actually developed this idea into creating small networks in each region of the world of allies that will actually do the US bidding in this world. And that is what is meant by the pivot to Asia, is to just focus on China and the Indo-Pacific and leave the work to small networks of allies. Now, this is, I think, going to be the continuity between the two administrations. I think Trump would, with his poster, is going to prefer this. But I think when it comes to the Middle East, Biden wanted it, or the I2U2, which is the two I's are Israel and India. The two U's are the UAE and the United States. I think that Trump would add to this Saudi Arabia and Egypt. But there is also one other thing, which is that Trump, of course, would like to add. I don't think he's going to be against a NATO, an Arab Middle East NATO, including Israel, of course. And my last point is about the Abraham Accords, which I think he's going to seek to do it. But in my view, neither the United States nor Israel will be the players here in doing the Saudi-Israel Accord. It's actually going to be the battlefield in Gaza. And it actually holds a peril to the United States, just as it happened during the Biden administration, which is, the whole idea is to bypass the Palestinian issue and have the relationship with the Arab world. And I think we all have seen that this was all frozen after October 7th. The last point, which is actually back to David's point about the transactional Trump, I think that Trump, the transactional, who's really bent on restructuring the American government, would really try to, but it's of course going to be facing resistance, would also try to reduce the congressional oversight over weapons sales, arms sales, and because that's what he would prefer to do other than the aid. Thank you for listening, and
Manar. And now we'll hear from Ambassador Karim Haggag on whatever he wants, but the MENA perspective, more or less.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be on the panel with Dr. Manar, and of course, my good friend David, who always is insightful with or without coffee. David, good morning. Good to see you. So let me make actually one key point when it comes to how we should think about a potential second Trump administration's approach with respect to the Middle East. So in order to get at this question, I've been fortunate enough in my career to serve for quite a lot of time in Washington, D.C. I've been through several election cycles trying to predict what a next administration will do with respect to our region and the U.S.-Egyptian relationship. And I have to confess, I always get it wrong. The reason is that administrations are unpredictable. What they say during the campaign is very different than how they govern. When they are actually in office, in the White House, priorities seem different, the outlook seems different. But with Trump, we have the benefit of hindsight. So this will be the second Trump administration. So maybe the right place to start is to assess what Trump has said recently about the region, whether in the context of the presidential campaign or certainly since he won the election. So if we look very quickly, Trump has said the following. He wants to end wars. Right? So he's not interested in wars in the Middle East. I think this is very much aligned with what the two previous speakers have said, that there is a tendency on the part of Trump not to avoid using force, because he certainly used force in the region before, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the use of force against Syria. But whenever it came to the brink of full-fledged armed conflict, Trump has actually held back. And we've seen that, for example, with respect to the US lack of response to the Iranian attacks against Aramco, 2018, the shooting down of an American drone over the Arabian Gulf by Iran. And on all of these occasions, Trump has actually held back. That is very much in line with his overall approach to the region. He sees the region as a place where he can make potential deals, so there are opportunities for transactional diplomacy. But other than that, there's nothing really worthwhile in the region that would prompt the United States to actually go to war. Going back to the first Trump administration, in an unguarded moment, Trump was heard to actually say, with regards to the Middle East, it's all sand. So there's nothing really worthwhile in the region to go to war for. That said, he has also been on record as reviving the previous approach, the very coercive approach of maximum pressure, especially against Iran. And that is very much in line with his very hawkish, coercive approach to how to deal with issues in general, right? Apply pressure when you need to, not only against adversaries, the case of Iran, but also against allies. We've seen that with respect to, for example, his approach to Turkey, when Turkey went ahead and bought the Russian S-400 anti-aircraft system. There was tremendous pressure put on Turkey by the Trump administration. With Saudi Arabia, you saw a very heavy-handed approach to pressure Saudi Arabia to bring down oil supplies, oil prices in the context of Saudi Arabia's participation in the OPEC Plus group. We can expect to see the return to deal-making in the Middle East. So as Dr. Manar mentioned, the Abraham Accords was initiated and concluded by Trump. But not only the Abraham Accords, fostering normalization between Israel and a number of Arab countries, but also the deal of the century. Trump actually invested in attempting to reach an Israeli-Palestinian agreement. Obviously, one that was heavily biased towards Israel, did not have any of the requirements for a just and lasting peace to the Palestinian issue, but nonetheless, this was a significant effort. And we've also heard Trump talk about a potential deal with Iran on its nuclear program. So coupling the very coercive approach of maximum pressure, but using that as leverage to say, look, I am the deal maker. I can get the best possible deal with Iran over its nuclear program. So if they come to the table, we can actually get a good deal. So ending wars, coercive diplomacy, the use of force without full-fledged conflict, transactionalism, making deals. So what then is new, right? And here I would argue that what's new is not so much Trump's approach. What is new is that the region has changed. Trump has not changed, but he will face a region that is very different than where the region was 4 years ago when he left office. And here I think it's instructive to rephrase the question. Not so much what Trump will do, but how will Trump respond to this changed Middle East? And here, I think it's instructive to look at a number of pressing issues that will face Trump almost immediately when he enters into office in January 20th. So first of all, with respect to Iran. Iran is now much closer to achieving a nuclear military capability than when he was in office. That is very much due to Trump's very consequential decision of withdrawing from the in 2018 from the Iran nuclear deal. And as a result, there are very few constraints now on Iran's nuclear program. So Iran is now virtually a threshold nuclear state. So the distance between that it has to cover to attain a military nuclear capability is actually quite small. So that presents a very precarious, almost silent crisis that Trump has to deal with. Trump will come into office and he will inherit a Middle East in the brink of war. So we have the ongoing conflicts in Gaza, we have the conflict in Lebanon. We will see how long the ceasefire that was announced yesterday, how long that will last. We have, for the first time, the direct armed conflict between Israel and Iran against each other's territory, which is a threshold that the region has crossed over the last year. So we have a Middle East on the brink of full-fledged armed conflict. How will Trump address that question? Especially since, because of the very unstable situation in the region, we had over the last year a tremendous escalation in America's military footprint in the region. So we had significant military deployments, primarily to deter Iran from escalating the conflict, to provide protection for Israel against Iranian missile attacks, to engage, for example, in the very large-scale operation, naval operation in the Red Sea against the Houthis, to allow for the passage of maritime shipping in the Red Sea. This very much goes against the instincts of Donald Trump, who does not want to get involved militarily in the region. So what does he do with that situation? The fact that the United States is now heavily militarily invested in the region. Does he scale that back? We've seen, for example, in the first Trump administration, the attempt to withdraw American forces from Syria, which was resisted by members of his administration at the time. Will we see that type of resistance to ending or at least scaling back America's military involvement in the region? With regards to the Arab-Israeli context, so here again, the prospects for normalization, achieving another normalization agreement, are now much more challenging. We have Saudi Arabia insisting that the price for normalization with Israel is achieving a Palestinian state, the establishment of a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as its capital, East Jerusalem as its capital. But now we have a situation in which the tremendous humanitarian toll that was exacted from the Gaza conflict will make it politically much more difficult to achieve a normalization agreement. And we have the most right-wing government in Israel, in Israel's history, that is now openly advocating for annexation of the West Bank and potentially re-establishing Jewish settlements in Gaza. So how does Trump deal with that? Pursuing a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia that will be immensely more challenging the second time than it was the first time. So these, I think, are the big questions. I am not sure Trump has thought about the answers to these questions, but it will be very interesting to see how Trump 2.0 deals with a Middle East that is fundamentally different than the one he left 4 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karim. And to all the panelists, I think we've heard some excellent analysis here so far. We certainly want to get to the questions from the audience. I just wondered if there's anybody on the panel who wanted to respond before we open it up. Is there anybody on the panel, including you, Dave, who might want to respond to something that one of the other panelists said or add to it?
I think we're all in agreement on the unpredictable nature of Trump, even though we do have a history, as Karim was mentioning, of the first term. We just don't know where his priorities are going to be on the international side. Almost none of his campaign was about the international picture, although a lot of his policies have very significant implications on international order as well as U.S. policy positions. So I think some of this is guesswork, and certainly someone who would have asked me before the election what would happen, would have proved me wrong and completely discredit anything I'm saying this morning. So,
Okay, thank you, David. Maha, could I ask you to relay the microphone to people who might have questions? So let's open it up to the audience. What are your questions and comments for our panel? Yeah, right over here on the left.
Good afternoon. My name is Omar Khalid Zaki. I'm an AUC alumni, and I am CEO of OKZ Sports Management. My question is, given the unpredictability of how Trump or President Trump will handle international issues, my question goes to what can we as the Middle East or Arab countries, how do we prepare ourselves for a foreign policy or with a foreign policy agenda? One comment I would add is that there are now, let's say, two main conflicts running around us, which is the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as Gaza, Lebanon. So where do we put our focus as Arab countries or as foreign policymakers? Where do we put our weight, given the unpredictability of how President Trump will act? Thank you.
Okay. Karim, Manar, would you like to weigh in on this?
Omar, thank you. That is an excellent question. I think the answer to answer that in terms of what states in the region should not do. States in the region should not wait until Trump takes office and potentially be pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised by what he may do. Trump, as I think you implied and we've said, the unpredictability is a very disturbing factor. Trump may make very difficult demands of countries in the region. So he may, for example, go to Saudi Arabia and tell Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, you have to normalize with Israel without a Palestinian state. He may call the President Sisi in Cairo and demand that Egypt open its borders with Gaza to allow Palestinian refugees to settle in the Sinai. He may actually ask or pressure Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to sign a ceasefire deal that he does not want to sign with Hamas in Gaza. He may do these things. I think what you are already seeing from leaderships in the region is an attempt to preempt these demands. So, for example, in the most recent Arab Islamic Summit in Riyadh, you've seen, for example, Saudi Arabia and other countries insisting on a Palestinian state as the price for normalization with Israel. And you've also seen a marked escalation in the language used with respect to Israel. So you see across the board, Saudi Arabia and others calling what's happening in Gaza as a genocide, calling for freezing Israel's membership in the United Nations. So these are actually quite strident demands. You've also seen Egypt's President Sisi reassert once again that allowing Palestinians into Egypt is a red line for Egyptian national security and for the Palestinian cause. I would actually argue that countries of the region should go beyond this. I think countries of the region should take the initiative to try and shape the reality that Trump will find when he comes into office. For example, tomorrow you will see a very large-scale conference in Cairo on Gaza reconstruction, right? International conference that will include specific steps, specific pledges on reconstruction in Gaza and on supporting UNRWA, for example. Another thing I think you will see is attempts to revive the ceasefire negotiations for Gaza during the last 2 months of Biden in office, right? So I think you will see these things, an attempt to shape the reality on the ground as much as possible so that Trump has to align with these processes and structures that are put in place. It's a very difficult reality, but the last thing countries in the region should do is wait for Trump to surprise them.
Follow up. I kind of looked like you had a follow up. I'd like to move on to some others, but if you have something quick that to follow up on, okay. Are there others? Yes, right here, in the front.
Hi, I have a follow-up to the point on changing the status on the ground or creating a reality on the ground. I think that Israel is really good at doing this with increasing West Bank settlements, increasing budget allocations, and so forth. And there's like this changing reality on the ground within the Palestinian state that will definitely have a spillover effect on the region. But when we say that Arab countries need to change the reality on the ground, I think we're moving towards a one-state reality that maybe no one wants to admit, or there's that sense of resistance. But if push comes to shove and it is a one-state reality, what are the steps that Arab states can take to be able to have a sense of justice, a sense of fairness for Palestinian communities that will be in this one-state concoction, and at the same time also protect their own interests? So it's not like giving everything and like the transaction, what would be the cost, essentially, the opportunity cost? Thank you.
Okay. Are there others? Maybe we could take another, because we're just about out of time. Are there any others? Okay, one way in the back. Make Maha get her exercise here.
Okay, hi. I'm Yasmin. I'm an undergraduate student, and my question is a maybe basic question, but we've always been hearing the statement that if Trump wins, and like you mentioned, like he said I'm gonna end the war in the Middle East and stuff. But I always wonder, like I hear this statement, and then I don't know how that's gonna happen. So when he claims he's gonna end the war, what does that mean? Yeah, that's basic question. Yeah, and how will he do so? You know, or when they say, yeah, we're better off if Trump comes because we know at least he's gonna end the war. So I'm just wondering about this. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yasmin. Okay, maybe one more. One more. Okay, back over to Amr.
Yes. So my question, the other question would be, we're looking at the international level. Recently, a veto from the US has been done for ceasing fire. So we have a lot of challenges, or how can we also look at the international challenge, or how the international system is failing miserably in stopping this war? And what implications does it have? Okay, we have a contradiction now. The ICC has issued warrants for Netanyahu and his Minister of Defense, but on the other hand, the US is vetoing ceasefire. So
Yes.
this confusion, or this,
Yes.
what is happening? So how can we as Arab states as well try and play a big role? I mean, what is our role internationally as well, not only locally or regionally, but internationally?
Yes. Okay. Manar or David, would you like to comment? David, did you have some thoughts on?
Oh, maybe I'll let Manar talk first. Karim and I both kind of followed up.
When it comes to the one-state solution, I think actually Israel has been pushing toward this for some time, because there is no land anymore and actually talking about a two-state solution is really, I mean, it's a talk in the air, but there are so many different versions of what is called the one-state solution that could take place. But I think, in my view, and I wrote that actually several times, is that the only solution is the one-state solution. For ending the wars, Yasmin, is that I think that Trump talked about his version of ending the war in the Middle East. He actually, during the campaign, talked about that. Talked about Israel that has to finish the job, which is really to continue its genocide, in my view. Or more than that, he was thinking that Netanyahu is doing a bad job. So whatever, whoever is going to be, whether it's Netanyahu or somebody else, it's actually going to be the Israeli version of the thing. For the other war, which is Ukraine, I think that Biden created a trap for Trump by opening it up for Ukraine to use the to use the American weapons to inside Russia proper. I mean, so it remains to be seen how he's going to deal with both of them.
Okay, thank you. David, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think one thing we've got to keep in mind, we keep going back to unpredictability and kind of impulsive, I said earlier. That can create both challenges and opportunities. Some of the rules, if you will, formal or informal, that we've all been operating on really for decades, will not be applied by Donald Trump, and they're not going to be before these kind of rules kind of set what normal U.S. reactions would be to certain issues. We don't have that with Donald Trump, which again is challenging for obviously the leaders of the Middle East and the globe, period. But it also creates opportunities. And this is kind of what Karim's talking about. How are you going to frame a narrative to a guy who has protectionist tendencies, who's looking at what American interests are? The rhetoric he uses, and and if there is consistency, and there's not, by the way, based on the people he appointed. You have people like Marco Rubio, is more or less a traditional Republican, and you have other people who are kind of more these Trumpite MAGA Republicans, whatever that is. But they use a certain narrative, and I think you can apply that in pushing issues forward. In terms of one state solution, Israel-Palestine, if Donald Trump looks at this seriously, it's first of all, who has his ear, and that is important. So some of the people he's appointed to work on this issues, of course, are coming from a perspective that would support the current Israeli government almost across the board. But also, remember, Trump sees this as a real estate problem. He's not going to get into the nuances of why deals haven't been made in the past. So, something that may look fair to him, he may go with, and the nations of the region will have to respond to that. Other things, again, I mentioned China earlier because that's important. One of the Trump administration's priorities, very clearly spelled out, is kind of this highlighting the conflict, potential conflict, strategic competition, however you want to phrase it, with China, and how that will be applied. Trump folks are looking at what countries are doing the most business with China. I would suspect you're going to see pressure from them to cool those ties or make them less visible. How practical that is, we really don't know yet, but I want to say challenges and opportunities.
All right, we're coming up against the 2 o'clock hour. I know people have to go to class and things like that. I just want to turn the mic over to Karim Haggag see if you have any sort of final response or final thoughts based on some of the questions we've had.
Thank you very much. Yasmin, right? Don't waste your time thinking about this question. I think you attribute too much seriousness to things that President-elect Trump says. So he said he will end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. So supposedly on January 21st, we will see the end of the war in Ukraine. No, but I mean, seriously, these are statements that I'm not sure he knows how to answer. So this will be a very ad hoc improvised approach to these conflicts, and it will be messy, and there will be contradictions in American policy, contradictions in what Trump says versus what he does. So stay tuned. Don't waste brain cells on this question. On just very quickly on this issue of Palestine. Whether it's a one-state or two-state solution, I don't think is the immediate issue. The immediate issue is I think we have a crisis in the Israeli-Palestinian arena. So we have an Israeli government on the verge of annexation. We have a silent campaign of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and this is not to speak of anything that's going on in Gaza. We have settler groups engaging in extreme violence against Palestinians in West Bank cities, West Bank villages. So we have a real crisis. If the crisis crosses the threshold to actual implementation of annexation, I think this will strain the relationships Israel has with Arab states, maybe even to the breaking point. I mean, we have to remember the first Abraham Accords, the normalization between Israel and the United Arab Emirates was conditioned on halting annexation, right? So that was the basic premise of the agreement, that Israel would halt annexation in return for normalizing the relationship. If there is annexation, if there is a collapse of the Palestinian Authority, if there is a full-fledged shift to violence, armed conflict in the West Bank, then that presents us with a real regional crisis. And that maybe gets to the last thing I'll say in response to Omar. Yes, I mean, we are seeing the breakdown of the multilateral system. That's a very complicated story that's for a separate discussion. And I think in response, you see the region has been attempting to take charge, right? You see that, for example, in the agreements between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, normalizing the relationship with Iran, with Chinese mediation, so not going to Washington, but turning to China to address this problem. You see this with respect to countries of the region trying to provide for their own security, as opposed to waiting for someone else to provide for their security. So you see the region taking charge. I think you will see more of that. In many instances, the region will not get it right, but the region is already moving in that direction. I think what the region may have to worry about is a second Trump administration making the situation worse as opposed to better. So the region will be very much on its own, but I think you will see much more initiative coming from the region attempting to address what be a very difficult situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karim. Thank you all for coming today. It's great to have you here and share some of your time with us. Thanks as well to each of our panelists for their expertise and what they brought to the discussion. Thank you all very much. And come see us again next semester. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Manar. Exactly. Yeah. Real quickly. Yeah.
فاكراني ولا مش فاكراني؟